Wonderful. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling in from. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Zach Ackerman. I'm Denison's Director of Business Development. I help lead our sales and marketing function here in the United States. And I also help to coordinate and manage our network of partners throughout the world. Joining me today is our founding partner and chairman, Dr. Dan Denison, who's going to walk us through how culture and leadership and our tools associated with each can be used and leveraged to create a really comprehensive change management program. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Denison, Dan, to get started.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Zach, and thanks to you all for joining us today. I want to talk a little bit about our leadership coaching practice this morning, and talk about how we've combined the things that we've traditionally done in both the culture area and in leadership development to create some new approaches that we're using with different client organizations. I know a number of people in our network have both coaching in their practice as well as organization development, culture change, consulting. And so this is very much designed at how do we combine these two things, because, we actually are always looking at the fact that the culture drives leadership behavior. But where does the culture come from? The culture comes from the behavior of people in the organization and leaders in particular. So what goes around comes around, that as the culture is influencing the behavior of individuals and leaders, the leaders are also creating the culture of the future through their action and their interaction. And that allows for a lot of different possibilities for combining these two components of our practice. And that's what I want to talk about today and present some of the things that we've done, some of the things that we've developed, and get some of your reactions and thoughts to share in the discussion. Looking at both the culture and the leadership space poses some important questions. How are they connected? As you said, culture has a strong influence on leadership, but over time, the behavior of leaders is what shapes the culture. So looking at how leaders help create the culture of the future and building on the seeds of the future that exist in today's leader and in today's organization to build the future is always an important thing to keep in mind. And what I want to do this morning in our time together is to first just give a brief case study overview of the approach that we take to leadership development and of our Leadership 360 evaluation and assessment process. And I have a case that'll also be in your handouts and in these slides, so you'll have that as an example. But then I want to turn to the one of the tools that we've developed to support this practice, which is a web-based tool that helps people take the results of doing the Leadership 360 and use that to build action that will improve their skills, their effectiveness as a leader. I want to give you an overview of that. And then I want to talk about some of the work that we've done about coaching in context, about how we combine the results for an organization on the culture survey with the results for an individual leader with our 360.
And as Dan dives into that, I just want to remind folks that we do have a chat function in this webinar, so please submit questions as we move along, and we'll take them at the end.
Great. Thank you, Zach. And let us know your questions. That's always good. We always enjoy that. We've developed our approach to assessing leaders in the early days of the firm, and we've used it for many years. But over the past 2 or 3 years, we've had a big increase in the level of coaching that we do and in the scale and scope of our leadership development practice. Last year, for example, We coached over 1,500 leaders in a number of different organizations around the world, and we keep building on that. And so we're also doing some product development and some writing and some new ideas, and that's part of what we want to share with you today. So the first thing is to just look at the base, and I included a case study here of a Silicon Valley HR executive. And like many 360s, this combines the results for the self with the combined other peers, direct reports, boss, and others, skip level in this case. And this helped us get a good picture of this leader who's a senior vice president. He's in his first year. He's with a new organization, and it's the first time that they've had a strategic HR role. Prior to that, they've had kind of a classic administrative HR role in the organization, and they saw clearly that they needed to move beyond this so that they would have HR with a strategic perspective and well aware of the strategic needs of the business, acting more as a business partner to the business units within the organization, and less as a kind of conventional personnel administration kind of function. So he went through a leadership development program. This was a combination of on-site training, action learning assignments, and individual coaching. And we coached this individual prior to entering the program and continued doing that afterwards. Now, on the face of this, you see kind of average to slightly more positive results across the board. The self scores are a little stronger, a little higher. There are some limitations that you see quickly in the combined other results with respect to defining core values. But you really don't see the picture with this individual until you look at the relationship between the peers, the direct reports, and the bosses and their boss. So you can see they have strong scores with respect to the boss. Boss thinks they're doing well. Peers think that the individual is doing quite well. Problem is with direct reports. And we've taught this case a number of times in our different workshops, and it's interesting because you lay out this data and you find that people immediately kind of attack this guy for neglecting his direct reports, which is a bit true. He hasn't paid the attention to his direct staff that he should be doing. But the interesting part about it, as you get into this, is it gets to be clearer that he's pretty preoccupied with this because it's a strategic role. His boss is the CFO, and Human Resources has always reported to the CFO in this organization. And this is a time when they're trying to dramatically change the strategic focus of the HR function. And so, he's spending a lot more time managing up than he is down. He's also spending a lot more time building buy-in and visibility and impact with his peers. And so this is an interesting example because the focus of the individual on managing up and in working with the C-suite team to define what a strategic HR role is going to look like in this organization has distracted his attention from managing his team. Furthermore, if you were making the change from a more administrative HR function to a more strategic function, the skills of the team, the old team, are not necessarily that well suited to the future organization. So, here we see a case where the behavior of the individual is only clear, only meaningful if you really understand the context. And this one made us think, because how much of the time that we spend when we're coaching are we spending on understanding the context that the individual is a part of and how they're working with that context? That's one of the most important functions of any coaching assignment. And that got us thinking about how can we better capture that? How can we better capture that using our own tools, our own culture assessment, and how can we best combine those so that we're getting something that's more than just looking at the individual leader, or something that's more than just looking at the culture of the organization. It's combining those to start doing our coaching in context, as the title of our presentation says today. This slide deck gives you our whole Leadership 360 report, and I just present this so that you've got it. It gives kind of matched perceptions and mismatched perceptions, which are comparing the self scores and the combined other scores, and then looks at strengths and challenges in that area. And then we have 8 items per scale, 96 items total, that are presented with this heat map kind of function. More color is better, and you can still see in this one the tremendous strengths that they have, for example, in building team orientation among peers. But that gets dark green colors, but with respect to building team orientation with the direct reports, that gets very pale green, because that's not an area where this leader has yet paid the attention that it deserves. So these slides just summarize that and give you an example of how those results look and how you interpret them. This is the core of our Leadership 360 tool, which is at the center of a lot of our practice, and a lot of our coaching assignments have come out of organizations that have adopted R360 for their own use, for their own organization, using it organization-wide, and then have developed coaching programs that support that and are built around that. So and this ends with a set of high and low scores, and more detail available on this if you want. There's a lot of things we've written on this. There are some other videotapes and all that speak to the Leadership 360 that we can send around to you if you are interested in getting more information, more background. But in reaction to this, we've also recently developed a very exciting tool, because everyone wants to know, when you look at your results, okay, I'm low in developing core values. What can I do to improve that? What can I do to build skills in that area? And so we've recently developed a web-based tool for one of our clients. We're busy rolling this out to support the rest of the practice, and wanted to just give you a brief overview of this today so that you could see what we're up to. This is a tool that goes to each of the leaders who has gotten assessed with our 360 tool, and starts with, are you interested in strengthening your leadership competencies? Well, look no further, because we've put together a package of things here that allows someone to look at the resources that are available in each of the 12 areas, and so that the areas where they're trying to build on the strengths that they already have, or they're trying to respond to challenges and build capabilities that may not be as strong for them at the moment, this is a set of resources that an individual can use and can draw upon. That's a web-based tool that can be distributed to support any of our Leadership 360 packages. The way that it works is that we went out and kind of mined the content on each of the 12 indexes that are in our model. This one's an example on defining strategic direction and intent. And, we looked at different popular press, different journals, different sources where we can pull out some of that material that fits well with our model and speaks to the issue of leading from a strategic point of view, of developing that competency in defining strategic direction and intent. So there's a set of resources here that they can click on and draw. There's a set of learning on the job exercises. This one's in strategic direction and intent. One of the things that we recommend is developing a document that builds on the company mission, vision, values, and the team's goals to clarify what the leader's role is in driving that. And these are a set of exercises. The second one's about our create, communicate, clarify, reinforce model of strategic communication. And that's a second exercise. So there's a series of exercises that you can click on and get more information about this. And then this also has the capability to link an individual manager with other people that have related, complementary, similar strengths, similar challenges, so that they can get matched with an executive mentor or a peer mentor. They can join or create a small group of people with common interests. You know, a lot of times when we do a set of 360s for an organization, you'll have a group of people that have challenges in the area of vision, strategy, setting goals, or whatever, and connecting them to other people that have the same set of challenges is one of the things that's offered by this website. And it also identifies training programs that can match their needs to the resources and skills that are available. The second example here is on a different dimension. It's developing organizational capability. Again, there's a set of resources drawn from leading management journals as well as popular sources. And that's a great set of readings and lessons and resources to access different thought leaders on this specific dimension of developing organizational capability. Then the second one is, again, a set of exercises on learning on the job. That includes 360 feedback, the individual's development, creating resources in a learning center that you can draw on, and creating development plans for the target manager and also for employees. And then on the social learning side, mentoring, group mentoring, and training also define ways that an individual can connect with others. We think this is important because it allows you to scale. A lot of times the needs for individuals across an organization go quite deep, but we don't always have the time and the resources to devote our attention to as many of the people throughout the organization as we do with the leaders that are at the top. It's kind of ironic because a lot of times the leaders and executives in an organization that get the most coaching are actually the ones that have had the most experience in the past, and in some ways are best suited to meet the challenges. The challenges are enormous, but the leverage comes by distributing this knowledge more broadly in the organization so that people can make the link between the strengths and challenges that are revealed by the 360 assessment, and then also the resources for what they can do and how that can enter into a coaching process, or how that can enter into them just applying these simple online exercises and tools so that they can improve their own capability. So that's a tool that we've developed and we're in the process of rolling out, and look forward to having you learn more about this and use it in your practice when you're supporting organizations that are doing 360 assessments, or in your own coaching practice where you're coaching individuals that have gone through some type of assessment process. So that's one important development that I wanted to speak to and make sure you guys were all aware of. The second thing that I'd like to talk about here is that the importance of coaching in context. One of the things that we've learned is how important it can be to use the data that we have in many cases on the culture of the organization to get a good feel for the match between the objectives of the leader's development, their agenda, and the objectives of the organization as it's trying to create strategic change. Because they do overlap, but it's amazing how they're often very separate. In some organizations, we even often see in larger organizations that these are separate departments, divisions, locations, that the OD work that we're usually involved with our organizational culture assessment, and the leadership development work that we're usually involved with when we're doing a Leadership 360, those are quite separate, and bringing those together can be a challenge. Our practice has the advantage that we've used the same model at both of these levels, so that it's easy to integrate these. Although it's funny, that's not always perceived as an asset in some organizations, because they have their own separate practices and they're not very well connected. And we think that's a disadvantage. We think there's a lot to be said for using the same model and the same perspective, defined differently at the organizational level and at the leadership level. At the organization level, it's about the characteristics of the organization. It's about the system. It's about the way we do things around here, and helps give you a good overview of that. And the points of leverage there are in developing the organization. On the leadership side, the focus is always on the competencies of the individual leader. And then the question is, how do we do a better job at coaching in context? And so a couple of years ago, with some of our colleagues here, Levi Neiman and Ben Biermeyer Hansen, we wrote a paper, chapter, where we started thinking about what happens when you have culture results for a business unit and you have leadership results for the individual leader, the top leader within that organization, and how do we better integrate those? And we've done a lot of research on this over the years, and we've looked at how well the scores correlate at the leadership level and the organization level, and the main finding we had there was that it depends on how long the leader's been in place. That when a new leader takes over an organization, they're not necessarily closely matched with the skills, between the skills of the individual and the culture of the organization. But when they've been there longer, then their influence is stronger, and there tends to be a more direct relationship. But we started looking at these gaps, and we started talking about experiences that we'd all had in coaching. And if you go in the upper right-hand corner of this diagram, a lot of times you have organizations that are they're very good at empowering people. They're a great place to work, and the individual has these strengths. They're really good at this. They excel in strengths. The leader excels in strengths that the organization excels in. So that's a coaching context where you have strengths in common. You usually find in those situations that the individual is highly motivated, the resources are rich in the organization, but they're very future-oriented, because when you have the strengths on both sides, leadership and culture, your challenge isn't in addressing the situation that you're in immediately. It's how do you build on these strengths so that you're creating a way to preserve and further strengthen those in the future. That's a very distinctive coaching session. And it's very different from one on the lower left-hand side, where, you look at the culture results and they show that this organization is really struggling to be adaptable, to be flexible, to focus on their customers. And then the leader that you're sitting at the table with says, yeah, I don't know either. I'm not very good at that. They don't have strengths on the adaptability side. They're not good at focusing on the customer. And then that draws on a really different set of skills for a coach. One of the things that becomes very helpful here is how you can export examples from outside the organization, because the fish weren't the ones that discovered water. If you're a leader that's not very good in customer focus, and you're in an organization that's not very good at customer focus, where do you go? What do you do? And that usually means that you're trying to import knowledge from outside of the organization. Case studies, thought leadership, examples. Some of the things that we showed you in the web-based tool become exceptionally important when you're trying to address some challenges where there's not a lot of lessons to be learned from the rest of the organization. Nonetheless, both have the same challenge. And look for a moment at the pros and cons of using an internal coach versus an external coach in this setting. If you have challenges in common, and you've got an internal coach, you still don't have very much to work with. An external coach in this setting that has a lot of experience in working with organizations that need to build these strengths, that don't have it internally, that's a really important asset. And one of the things that we found is that can even be a factor in how we do the assignments for coaching sessions. Now, it gets even more interesting when we look at the diagonals here. And in the lower right-hand corner, we have a situation, and this often applies to new leaders, where the organization has these strengths. They have many leaders that know how to do coordination and integration, cross-functional leadership. And so a mentorship program works great. You can draw on a lot of expertise. You can look at internal case studies. You can draw on the ongoing organizational change, OD efforts. And these are all a really rich source that you can draw upon in the coaching session to try to improve the individual leader. And they're everywhere. And especially when leaders are new and in an organization with a positive culture, it's a rich set of resources. An internal coach could work really well in this situation, because you've got the strengths, you've got the knowledge, it's already there. This one individual needs to learn from that, soak that up, take on the lessons of the organization, and just kind of study the logic of the organization, the key habits, the key competencies that individual needs to learn in order to lead well in context. So that's the third one. Now, the last one that I've got another short case study on here to share with you is where the leader has the strengths that the organization doesn't. That the leader has great strengths, and in an area like agility and adaptability that aren't very well reflected in the culture of the organization. This is a completely different dynamic because the individual leader is well ahead of best practice in the organization. And it can even be a little bit demotivating because really what you're saying is that the leader has this figured out, but good luck getting the rest of the organization to follow you. And especially when you're hiring mid-level, senior level hires from the outside, where you're trying to build a set of strengths that are counter to the culture that's built up over time. A lot of people are in that situation and are trying to figure out how they can have their impact. The organization needs it, but if the culture change efforts remain separate from the leadership development, then you really don't have the means to mobilize the talent that does exist in the organization. So then we started looking at this question. Are your leadership development efforts a strategy for culture change? And one of the examples that we got here started with the organizational culture data, especially with the extremely low scores on creating change, and in general adaptability and agility across the board in this organization were pretty challenging. They were a good employer, and they had good scores in involvement. They had good scores in many areas of consistency, and not bad in mission. But the issues of agility and adaptability were their lowest capabilities. So that sets the agenda for making the organization more adaptive, more responsive, more agile, and better able to change. Well, in that context, we started doing coaching with a number of leaders, and what we found was that actually there were a lot of those leaders that had a lot of skills that were in the areas of adaptability, agility, creating change. And there was a range, of course, and so this profile on the right side took the Leadership 360 scores from the top half of the leaders who were the most adaptable. Because we were trying to use the leadership development agenda and efforts in the organization to help them create a level of adaptability that they didn't currently have. And so when we were surprised when we looked at the top half of the leaders, because actually their scores on creating change were at the 80th percentile. They were strong across the board, but especially in this area, they were really strong. But the organization very badly needed this capability. So the coaching in this situation started to go beyond just coaching the individual leader, and we started trying to build a cadre of adaptable leaders in the organization and engage them much more directly in the process of changing the organization. And we made proposals that we should create an action learning program around these adaptable leaders. They haven't adopted that yet, but we're still working on it, so that they could help them define the ways in which the organization could benefit by being more adaptable and by getting better at creating change. And so this is is a live example, still ongoing, where we're trying to identify the connections between the individual's core competencies and the change agenda of the organization, so that we're always doing our coaching in context, and that we're looking at a gap between the culture scores and the leadership 360 scores to try to create some tension and some energy. And what we've found as we started doing this is that those leaders that have the characteristics that the organization needs, really like being called out for that, and really rise to the challenge of pursuing their own development as leaders in the context of making an impact and changing the organization. So let me stop there, because that's an overview of several of the new things that we're doing that are all built around this theme of doing coaching in context. We think that's really important, and we think that as organizations are trying to respond to the rapid pace of change in the marketplace, that integrating these efforts and getting better at using the resources that you have internally in an organization that may not have much visibility. There's always the seeds of the future always exist today. Our job is to find those, shine the light on them, learn from them, and then try to mobilize so that they can help drive the change process in the organization. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions that you want to raise or.
Wonderful. So as a reminder, there's a chat function if you have any questions. This is a really powerful way to design a broader talent management program. When you're trying to connect the behaviors of your people to the ideal culture you want to create, leaders are a critical linchpin in that discussion, and can model the behavior you want to see down the ranks. So what you create for the leaders can be cascaded down to the organization, reused, recycled. So the implications are vast and rippling as well. And again, we'll take any questions if you have them. If we don't see too many, we'll just remind you that we'll be sending this video out. It'll also be posted on our website, on our webinars page, which you can find via our homepage. Additionally, when we follow up, we want to hear from you about what topics are of most interest, so that we can cater to your needs and your interests and your clients' interests, perhaps most importantly. So please, there'll be a pulse survey sent out again as follow-up to this webinar, and please provide your inputs and vote on other people's inputs as well.
Okay, here's a good question that came up. The question is, how many of our clients use both culture and leadership assessments? And which way do they start? Do they start with one, move to the other? Do they start with both? And that is that's very interesting, because what we really see is a wide range. We have most of our clients, our culture practice, organizational change practice, is about 2/3 of our business. Our leadership development is about 1/3. So many people come to us via that route. But we also have clients that are primarily Leadership 360 clients. And so in some organizations, we're saying, well, this is culture plus leadership. In others, we're saying, well, this is leadership plus culture, because they do have different starting points. And probably about a quarter of our clients use both of those assessments. And we're trying to build that, because this has some power. And combining these two perspectives is a way to really make an impact on the individuals and on the organization. Oh, and I see we got another question here too.
Dr. Denison, can you speak to the beliefs and assumptions of senior teams as related to the leadership culture connection? Specifically, how do competing values impact this work?
Good question. It varies a lot by organization. It makes me think of work that we do in private equity context. A lot of senior teams in private equity firms are in a lot of turmoil. They don't do very much long-term investment, and they definitely have competing values of building for the longer term, and getting positioned to deliver and to sell, to exit, and that combination, does mean that it can be pretty contentious. But the other side of that is that organizations that haven't invested the time in developing their leaders don't have a very coherent team at the top. And in professional organizations, I was just working on Friday with a colleague that does a lot of work in law firms. And, trying to have a managing director of a law firm influence your star rainmaker lawyers, there's a lot of competition in the between those ideas. And so, understanding the organization's commitment to developing their people in their organization is always core. And while we experience an incredibly broad range, some are moving so fast and see the development of their leadership capabilities as being one of their highest priorities, and that we're running hard to keep up with them because they see the need, they see the value for the future, and others, they're just scratching the surface. And you're trying to make the point that this is a key in their performance. I was just with a client yesterday in New York that had done a few pilot projects with some of their plants, and the ones they were targeted on were their troubled plants. So they did 2 or 3 of those, and they said, "Well, do you always get low scores like this?" And said, "No, it's linked to the performance of the organization. So give us a couple of your best performing plants." And they did that, and they saw kind of full living color in the results. And this is an organization that struggles to build the momentum, to build the commitment, to really invest in their people, their leaders, their organization. But that link to performance helped push that one along. Each organization is unique. The beliefs and assumptions they have about investing in their people at the top are going to cover all of the work that we do. And so it's important to understand that from the start and work within that. You always have to start at the beginning, wherever the client is, and work from where they're at, and take that one step at a time.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to time. Again, we'll be circulating the video and some follow-up materials, and please participate in our Waggle Pulse about what topics you want to hear about next. Anything of interest to you or your clients, that feedback is more than welcome. We'll connect with you soon, and you'll hear from us on next steps shortly. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us.